discussion, so let's pretend we're at the family dining room table. My name is Kurt Smith, and I am charged with giving you a very quick overview of economic development. We call it Economic Development 101. One of the observations we garnered from our meetings as a group was that folks had different interpretations, and some weren't very familiar with the term economic development. And so the purpose of this forum is to provide an overview of what economic development is, but more importantly, to have a distinguished panel of folks who are actively involved in economic development, who will be here to kind of talk about what they're doing, but also to answer questions that you may have about economic development that's happening here in the city of Detroit. And so I'm going to start with I got about 15 slides to go through that are going to provide a background as to economic development. And there's a caveat as I see it. I'm an urban planner. My career has been working with historically disadvantaged populations. I'm a social justice kind of guy. And so I will provide you a slant towards economic development that I think reflects my experience working with generally the underserved in the city of Detroit. And so I think the approach I took to address economic development was basically to ask 3 questions and share with you our experiences as a group working with the Whole Foods market. And so those 3 questions are, what is economic development? Who does economic development? And then the question of, is economic development good? So I came up with my own definition of economic development. I'm not sure how close it is. I thought about going and looking in a dictionary, looking at some of my textbooks, but I said, you know what? Let me just go off the top of my head, close my eyes, and this is what I came up with as a definition of economic development. I said it's a targeted allocation of resources which could include financial incentives, public improvements, or policies to spur and or support economic activity in a specified geographic location, industry, or segment of the population. And then next, who carries out economic development? And generally, economic development is carried out in these sectors: the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the government, and certainly, thank you, individuals partake in their own personal economic development. And we do have water coming, and that will be handed out to you. And certainly, everyone performs economic development. If they don't know they do it, they do. Some examples of private sector economic development, and I'm dating myself too. GM and Henry Ford, when GM was on the boulevard, they spent a lot of resources beautifying and making the new center area attractive. They would put the Christmas lights out. They would also sponsor, they were original sponsors of the Taste Fest, and I'm not sure what it's called now. And then also, I remember, and they've done this kind of recently, but they used to provide rental subsidies if you were to rent in the new center area. And that was GM's headquarters. It was on the boulevard, and certainly Henry Ford Hospital. And part of the goal of that economic development activity was to make the new center an attractive place where their employees want to live, and then also a place where they would also want to work. Some other examples of economic development from the nonprofit and the philanthropic arena. Kellogg and Kresge are foundations that we know a lot about in the nonprofit sector. They make grants available for specific initiatives. They used to have an artist grant where they gave money to artists to help them create, develop their craft. And then also, from my experiences working at COTS, there were all kinds of funds available to spur economic development activities around child care facilities. And then we have Midtown Inc., who is doing a phenomenal job working in the Midtown area, and they provide, among other things, technical assistance and funding for new developments and for business retention in the Midtown area. And we have Scott on the panel that can talk about those type of activities that they do. The other source of economic activity comes from the government, both the feds, the state, and local. The feds generally provide tax credits, low-interest loans for specific projects. Some examples that I have worked with was the low-income housing tax credit, which is a housing program designed to build new housing for affordable rents. There's the brownfield tax credits. Those are tax credits where to redevelop blighted or older industrial properties in the city. And generally the credits work where they give you a discount off of your income taxes. So those are usually the tax credits. And then, of course, as you know, the president is pushing the green industry, where they're offering all kinds of incentives for economic development activity around green and environmentally, and also looking at other alternative forms of energy. And then you also, when you get to the state level, they provide tax abatements. That's where to attract businesses, the state will waive your taxes, and they do that to compete with other states. And so these plants, when they locate in Georgia, North Carolina, and all those different states, a lot of times they have all of their taxes waived for a number of years. And then finally, on the local government, there's all kinds of economic development activities that are designed to spur growth. The City of Detroit, for example, provides direct grants and loans. Some examples of how they do this are through the Community Development Block Grant, where they will give money to nonprofits to partake in certain particular activities. And then also there's the Home Loan Program, which is used to help build housing and provide financing for those type of projects. And also what the city does as well is that they will match development projects by providing infrastructure improvements. So you're building a new apartment building, office building, the city will come in and say, we'll build you new sidewalks, or we'll widen the street, or we'll repave the street and put it on the priority. And then in my neighborhood, over in North Rosedale Park, there was some funding to install decorative street lighting, which was used to augment a facade improvement program in the neighborhood. And then finally, there's another way that cities, local governments can assist development, and it's something that's close to me as an urban planner, and that's with zoning. They will, in order to attract businesses or to keep businesses, sometimes they will augment and amend the zoning codes so that, or the zoning ordinances, so that new businesses will come or they will stay. And the most recent example that we have is with urban farming, that the city council is looking, and I think they may have done it, but I'm not sure, to change the zoning laws to allow commercial scale farming in the city of Detroit. And so those are some of the ways that the local government participates in economic development. But then also, we as individuals partake in economic development activities, we may not know it. And some of the ways that we do it is that we individually make decisions to support activities. And I don't know if you remember when Hudson was downtown, they had Downtown Detroit Days. And folks really were active and made it a point to support the businesses in downtown Detroit during those days they had the Downtown Detroit Days. And so that's an example of personal economic development activity. And most recently, the Made in Michigan is an example of targeting to support businesses that are located in Michigan. And then also there's a move to purchase locally grown produce in season. And again, these are individual choices that contribute to an economic development activity. And then here's a recent one, is the flash mob, where people would go and dance, but they've also incorporated the flash mob where everybody would go support a particular business. Either it's a new business in the neighborhood, they want to support it. And I can't remember when it happened, but Ye Old Butcher Shop was the recipient of a flash mob type of, everybody go there and buy and support this new grocer here in Detroit. And so those are some examples of individuals partaking in economic development projects on their own. The next question, this is the one where I think there's a lot more discussion. Is economic development good? And I think one way to address that value question is to consider two things. Number one, who are the stakeholders? Question?
No,
oh.
no, that's right.
Okay, yeah, who are the stakeholders? And then who do you ask? And So I think by going in that direction, you can kind of get an example of, is this a good economic development project? Examples of stakeholders in economic development projects are the existing businesses and the future businesses that the project wants to attract. Existing residents and the future residents that the economic development activity wants to attract. And I think in Midtown is a good example of a lot of the activity in Midtown is designed for folks who live here to take advantage, but also to make it attractive and to bring in new residents into this community. Another group of stakeholders would be the unions, and then certainly the other stakeholders could be the Chamber of Commerce, environmental groups, advocacy groups, and your block clubs. I think we all would know that it's not uncommon for there to be divergent set of values and objectives among the stakeholders. So what's good for one person may not be attractive to another person. And that also is part of the reason why there needs to be discussion, transparency, and all the ideas can be brought to the table. Now, some of the folks that you can use to express your concerns have been elected officials and appointees. They generally hear the input of the stakeholders and then make policy decisions. We have a new scenario here in the city of Detroit with the emergence of the emergency financial manager. And as you have seen that in the papers, that the city council has no authority anymore. So it'd be interesting to see how public hearings and those type of endeavors are going to be handled going forward in terms of the decision-making process for economic development activity in the city of Detroit. The public's voice in economic development is especially pertinent when public funds are used. And that was part of the impetus that we used for Equitable Detroit Coalition with the Whole Foods Market development. We were informed that the developer of the land had received some incentives through the Economic Growth Corp, and which is a semi-public private entity. And as such, we felt charged to find out information about, what was the deal, what were the incentives, and if they're going to take this public money, then we felt it important that they hear from the public and get our input into what we thought and want to know more about Whole Foods Market. But certainly, the public's input often is required by ordinances. A lot of times we have to have a public hearing on certain type of activities. In addition, certain regulations require letters of support, where if in order to receive the economic development funding, you have to go out and you have to solicit support from people who live in the neighborhood. And I have been to some of the Economic Growth Corp's public hearings where they have the meeting in the neighborhood that will be affected and invite residences. They have to send out letters and let them know that there's a public hearing. In the case of the Whole Foods Market, it was a pretty neat example. It was kind of different. Whole Foods Market reached out to the community and said, we're building this store and we want to get folks' input. And we certainly obliged and met with the Whole Foods folks. Our organization, Equitable Detroit Coalition, was originally called the Community Advisory Group to the Whole Foods Detroit Market Store. And EDC is an assembly of community groups whose purpose was to help shape the Whole Foods Market Detroit development. We were very fortunate because we provided community input to Whole Foods Market. We met twice a month with the Whole Foods Market staff, and we were involved in just about every phase of that development, from reviewing the site plan to reviewing the interior layout of the store. We were provided confidential review of the marketing and the shelf, the layout of the merchandise in the stores, which is proprietary. And we were asked to be confidential in what we saw and we discussed. We were involved in the artwork that would go inside the store, as well as the murals that are going to go on outside the store. And in addition, the CEO, Walter Robb, came down to Detroit from Texas, and he met with the group 3 times to get our feedback and to talk to us. And these are some of the ideas that the Equitable Detroit Coalition advocated from Whole Foods Market. We advocated that Detroit residents and minority vendors work on the construction site. We advocated that 50% of Detroit residents hired at the Detroit store. And we advocated that Whole Foods Market support local food businesses. We were concerned that when Whole Foods Market came into Midtown, they would affect in a negative way the existing businesses around. And so one example of Whole Foods trying not to minimize have a negative impact was they reached out to the local food producers and offered to purchase their product. So for example, Avalon Bakery became the bread provider for Whole Foods Market. And at the Detroit store, Whole Foods Market does not have a bakery. In all the other stores, they have their own ovens. So they're going to support the existing businesses. And then also, they had a concerted effort to reach out to local food manufacturers to support their products on the shelves at Whole Foods Market. And us as an advisory group, we really pushed that strongly, and we're pleased that they did reach out. In the process of reaching out, they also realized that there were some capacity issues with local vendors and local food manufacturers, and they are working to increase their capacity so that they can become vendors on the scale that Whole Foods Market needs. And one of the other items that we advocated for as a group was the ban the box. And for those of you who don't know what that means is the box on the application that asks for your criminal history. And we were, committee members had brought up that box on the application no longer needed to be on there, that folks had served their time and should be afforded the rights of every other citizen and access to employment. And we fought that one pretty tough, and that is one of the goals and objectives that we wanted that did not get met by Whole Foods Market. They stuck to their policies of keeping the box of whether or not a person has a felony. So that concludes the Economic Development 101. Just wanted to give you an overview of what economic development is and how the Equitable Detroit Coalition came together. And then finally, I'll leave with the mission statement for the Equitable Detroit Coalition. And that reads, the mission of the Equitable Detroit Coalition is to foster a beneficial relationship between business owners, developers, and the Detroit community by facilitating open and honest dialogue, assisting businesses and developers in becoming good corporate neighbors, transparent in relationships with community, and to advocate for business and developers to support a just and equitable system of economic development in Detroit. And next, you're going to hear from our panel. And one of the focuses that we wanted to talk about was to share with you what they're doing, but also to highlight one of the values that we hold in the EDC is it's so important that economic development projects in the city of Detroit support Detroit residents and Detroit businesses. And so we have a dynamic group of panelists who come with a tremendous amount of experience, knowledge, and can talk to you about what they've done in that arena. So I guess what we'll do is we'll start with Scott. Tell us a little about yourself.